Brandon Missler, welcome to the podcast.
Dude, great to be here. Heard lots of stuff about it. I'm excited to finally be in the room.
Man, it's great to have you here. You're such a blessing to our church family. You really do have a gift with kids, and me having 4 little kids, well, now 2 of them they're all getting older.
Grown kids, you getting big kids.
They're moving on up. But we just had our oldest graduated from your ministry into youth ministry, and that's kind of wild. But no, we were so grateful for you and the gift that you have and the way you love on our kids here in this church. And so, but I think today we got an interesting discussion. It's going to be a little about discipleship.
Absolutely.
Which I'm looking forward to hearing. So how do we kick this thing off, man? How would you define, because, discipleship's kind of one of those terms that in the Christian circles, it's almost silly how people is like a hot word, like, oh, well, this, and everyone wants to define it. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it. So how would you define discipleship?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I truly believe that we have severely overcomplicated what discipleship is.
Amen.
And really, for me, it is simply living life out in front of someone. And I think of that, in my opinion, I know you may not call it specific discipleship, but to me, it is simply just, you can disciple someone in the way of fishing. You can disciple someone in the way of hunting.
That's right.
You can disciple someone in marriage. You can disciple someone in their faith. And for me, when we were talking about this, is I've just always loved, kind of the terminology, passion with a purpose. And that for me, when I look back, when I was thinking about what I could talk about discipleship, if I were to look back on a lot of probably the young men that I have discipled, I have spent time, probably the ones that I'm the closest with today, has been time in the boat. And what's crazy about that is I used to feel guilty because, if somebody called you and they're like, hey, what are you doing this afternoon? It's
Fishing.
Well, I'm out fishing with a buddy. Well, do you not work? Do you not do stuff? And then I learned really quick in my life and just through the history is, if I were to look back, I've got young guys that have come up through my ministry that I'd spent 8 or 10 years with, but you spend an afternoon in a boat with somebody doing something, one, that I'm passionate about, but 2, that one-on-one time, all of a sudden it gives you an opportunity to really get to know someone and really dig in and then buy in to that person's life. And I think one of the key things for me in discipleship is that person has to know that you have buy-in into their life. Because, for example, me and you, if I were to come to you and, say, hey, I see the way you're doing this. I don't think that's very wise. You know what? If we don't have a history together, you're really going to look at me and be like, dude, who are you and why are you telling me this stuff? But when you look at stuff and you're like, hey, we've lived a lot of life together. We've been through a lot of things together. All of a sudden you're like, well, hey, this person has an opportunity to speak into my life. And so there again, when I say passion with a purpose, I do think you have to have a purpose. You have to move those things along when it comes to discipleship. And
well, can I pause you for a second, because I love this, and I think because so many people I think get overwhelmed with, well, do I know how to? Jesus said, "Make disciples of all nations," and so it's like, but does that mean I have to sit down and like have this sheet of paper and like walk them through all these? We kind of make it that, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that by all means. I think there's many ways you can, because to be a disciple is to be a learner. And what I love about you connecting some dots is like, how did you define it at first? How did you say that? What you said something before sharing life. What did you say? Something about
wasn't passion with a purpose.
Maybe it was that. But I'm just thinking like just the fact that, okay, I can just, like, we've all learned things.
Yes.
Like in our faith, like, and that's from successes, that's from failures, like, but we're learning. And so then discipleship is me helping others learn what I've learned. Like, it's passing those things on. Help me out with how you're doing that with the passions. So there's things that you're naturally going to do. Like, you would be just fine. Am I fair to say you would be perfectly content on a boat by yourself fishing?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of times that's actually what I strive for is,
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, like, I love being around people, but also in the same token. And I think part of this is, I think when we're on staff, I think you just naturally, anytime you're with somebody, you feel like you need to be pouring in. You feel like that there's an agenda, or maybe somebody's looking for things out of you. So there are times it is hard for me to just disconnect.
Yep.
I just want to be there.
Yep.
I don't want to talk to him about it. I don't want to dig deep.
Yeah.
But on that same token, when I look back in my life, you can cruise along fishing, and fishing, unfortunately, especially for me, there's a lot of downtime. I mean, there's a whole lot more casts where I don't catch a fish than when I do. Okay. And so with that, all of a sudden you can start talking to someone and start asking them, hey, so, how are things going on at home? How are things going on? And so you start to dive off into that. And then as they start to ask questions, then you can start to turn it spiritually.
And that's where you're getting the purpose side of it. Like, I'm going to do this thing that I love to do, whether I'm by myself or with someone. But since someone's with me, I'm going to make the most of it and not just fish. I'm going to initiate maybe I'm asking questions or I'm listening to what,
Absolutely.
I'm going to make sure I like that.
Well, and even with that, it makes it so much easier when you're something that you're passionate about, because then I can invite you, and I'll be honest, like I've got people that I've asked to go fishing that never picked up a fishing pole. They sat in the back of the boat. It was a nice day. They sat back there and they just talked. And I'll be honest, when I say a passion, for me, that's fishing. Hunting, it may be a little harder if you're deer hunting, but I mean, there's doe. Yeah.
Not right now.
I had a question about marriage. Shh. Keep it, save it for later. But for me, like fishing, I honestly could care less if you ever pick up a fishing pole or not.
Okay.
I'm there. Now, if we start catching much fish and I want to take more home, I'm going to say, hey,
take this rod,
do your part, here. But for me, that's where I think the passion, because I have seen that in basketball. Like I've seen it in sports, working out. For you, I think jiu-jitsu has become something that I've heard of a lot of those relationships. And it may not even be in that moment, but you have used relationships that you formed through jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And honestly, this can be kids' sports. I sat and talked yesterday with a good buddy from high school, and he was talking about his kids are getting up in that age, starting to play football. And he was saying, man, he said, I just can't believe how important, from watching other teams, how important it is for me, for one, as a coach, to pour into players, but two, to pour into parents, to let them know that, hey, this is how I want this to go, because his goal was he wants his son to love football long term. If that's what his son wants to do, but he wants all those kids to leave with a good experience. And so I'm thinking the same thing with even parents on the, you're stuck in the stands with these folks week in and week out. Sometimes you're taking trips. Sometimes maybe you're taking their kid, and all of a sudden it gives you this opportunity to just ask them, hey, how are things going? And there again, do things you're passionate about, because we're all busy. Yeah. It makes it really hard that if we're not, so I guess what I'm saying is, if I came in here and said, hey, you need to set apart, an hour each day or an hour each week where you go outside of yourself and just go sit down with someone.
I heard somebody say once that, and I thought this was really wise. They said, instead of when you have new things, you feel like, hey, I think God's kind of asking me to make this part of my life. Instead of adding to, incorporate into what you're already doing. Which I thought that was, and that's what I hear you saying with this. It's like, it's not that we have to go find these discipleship times. It's like the times are there if we're willing to see it.
Absolutely.
If we're willing to recognize, like, hey, I'm not just at a ball game right now, or I'm not just on the boat with this friend. Like, those are moments that we can make the most of if we guide those conversations the right way.
Absolutely.
And I love that. That's a good challenge.
Yeah, and I think also changing our mentality of what discipleship is. And there again, you can't get so far over in, I always think of a pendulum on a clock. You kind of want to be in the middle, okay? So like, one is, I think, two, change the mentality of what is discipleship. And it's simply living life out in front of somebody.
That's what you had said earlier. I couldn't remember.
Okay,
that was it.
Living life out in front of them.
Thank you.
So when a ref, and that's a good friend of mine, there again, I was kind of shocked, but he said, I told my boys, when the team, he said, when we started, he said, guys, he said, no matter what, the ref is always right out there on the field. You understand? He said, I want you to have that attitude that the ref is right, because your poor attitude is not going to go back and change that ref's call. He said, if there needs to be a conversation, I'll have that. But, and see, and we were sitting there and I said, well, golly. And so even as a parent, if you lay that out, and if you're constantly, how your kids watch you respond, that's discipleship. Now, it may not be true spiritual discipleship, but I think that those are foundations that are constantly being laid, and kids, other people are constantly watching us.
Do you think it's fair to say, in light of your definition, which I really appreciate, living life in front of it, like we are discipling to some way, shape, or form?
Absolutely.
It's just the question is like, what are we passing on? What are they learning? Like that's happening.
Yes.
Whether we like it or not.
Yes.
Because people are watching us and people are being influenced. Every single one of us has some type of sphere, home, neighborhood, work. Like we have circles that we hang in and people are watching.
Absolutely.
And
all the time. In fact, I would say that a lot of times, especially in our normal realm of life, when you're not talking to someone, it's probably more discipleship than when you are, because that's going to determine how much, there again, if you're standing outside all the time and if your neighbors hear you yelling at your wife or yelling at your kids or all this kind of stuff, well, when you sit there and you say, hey, I was wondering if you'd like to come to church on Easter, or you just want to go up and just have this inviting, you know what, they're already going to have a preconceived notion of what's going on. And so they're going to sit there and they're going to be like, man, I don't really like the way that you handle your stuff. And so there again, like you said, people are watching, and it's just a matter of being purposeful in those times. And like I said, some of that's passion with a purpose. Like I think of my friend Warren Basinger. We went fishing, and there's really nothing more frustrating than setting the hook on a big fish and your line breaking, because then you're just forever in the wonder of what that was. And believe me, I've seen some fish come up and jump. I broke my line on a 12-inch fish, and I broke my line on a 4, 5, 6 pound fish. They come up and jump, and then you're just. And we were in there, and it was me, my son, and Warren. And Warren set the hook and missed the fish. And the way he responded is he said, man, I really wanted to say something I shouldn't have said. And he was sitting there, and Connor was like, well, what would you have wanted to say? And so it gave sitting there a chance. And I'm sitting there going, man, Warren, I'm so thankful, one, that I chose the right people to be around my children. But two, the fact that you are then reaffirming, Dusty's big on having, I think, 5 or 6 people in your children's life that are all reaffirming what's going on. And I think that that's the same thing is there again. We can't get caught up. Discipleship is not only sitting in a room reading the Bible. Discipleship's living life and out in front of those person. And then there again, now my son can always remember that because of how Warren responded in that moment. So if Warren ever comes to my son, well, last week he taught 2nd grade council time. I'd say if he tells Connor, hey, Connor, can you be quiet? Connor'd be like, dude, Mr. Warren, we went fishing together.
Yeah, he's got a connection. Well, and that's right, because maybe that's the beautiful balance. You mentioned the pendulum, however you say it. It's like, you've got, when it comes to discipleship, people are doing usually either or. It's like either all, because obviously we believe in getting together and studying the Bible, but at some point you have to connect the dots with what the Bible teaches with what actually happens in real life.
Absolutely.
So, as it James, let us not merely listen to the word and so deceive ourselves, but actually do what it says. Well, how do we learn to do what it says? And what I hear you saying, which I think is a great connecting point, Connor's watching this man refrain from saying something. Well, Proverbs talks about that, right?
Yeah.
Like there's moments we should experience in life where we want to say something and we don't.
Yeah.
And we actually display something called self-control, which is a fruit of the Spirit, right? We should be able to do that. And he saw that and he was honest enough just out loud.
Yeah.
He probably wasn't even thinking about y'all listening. He just literally said that like, I really want to say, but how cool is it for he's connecting dots. So now when he goes to the biblical text about someone watching his words and being restraining and being careful and quick to listen, slow to speak, he's like, oh, I saw Mr. Warren do that. That's what we're missing. Because oftentimes the Bible just becomes this intellectual thing that we know a lot of things about, but we don't know how to apply it to our life.
Absolutely.
And that makes me sad.
Yes.
So we need those connecting points to go, oh, that's what that meant. And I feel like that's a lifetime of learning. We never arrive.
Absolutely.
I need more and more of that so I can connect those dots.
Yes. This summer at church camp, I remember this the speaker, a guy named Shane Pruitt. Love a lot of the stuff that he's put out. And one of the things that he put down, the 2 things that really stuck out was this is the first generation of children that are largely parented by undiscipled parents. And what that's saying is, and I think I look back, and there again, I know life is crazy. But, 80 years ago, men had the tools, women did a lot of the, things in the kitchen, in the house, all these things that were lived out in front of the children. And then that's naturally you put time in the garage, in the yard, on the farm, in the house, whatever that was, time. And there again, that's a form of discipleship. And then, as life came, we get busier and busier, whether it's, whatever it is, cost of living, two parents not inside, two working parents, all of a sudden it falls largely on the church to disciple our children. And to be honest, even if, listen, I'm not a perfect children's pastor, but even if I was doing a fabulous job, the most favorable kids that are here all the time, I mean, you're looking at 3 or 4 hours a week that they're here, that they could even be getting that, when the reality is they're in our homes and they're in, and so that really stuck with me because, I mean, even for me, I learned a ton whenever I came here, even started volunteering here, and all of a sudden you have men pouring into your life and pointing you in the right direction. And there again, that all is watching how they live life, and then in turn, then all of a sudden you can kind of hear, and you hear what they're saying.
Do you think for you, because discipleship goes two ways, there's both the ways in which you're going to pass things on to your children, to the kids in this church, but also there's, you continuing to learn.
Yes.
How do we make sure there's space for that in our life? Because that, if I'm always the one pouring out and I never have that, how can we kind of make sure that both of those things are taking place? Because I feel like that's needed, right? When you read I forget what psalm it is, but there's this, I think it's a couple of them that starts out, "Teach me, O Lord." Like, I love that because I feel like that's the cry that I hope I pray the rest of my life.
Yes.
Just teach me, O Lord.
Yes.
So how can we kind of make sure that I got both of these things? Like, hey, there's moments that I want to make the most of, passion with a purpose, but also there's another side of the coin. Man, I need to be learning too. Have you done that, or how can we do that and encourage others to do that as well?
I think for me is I'm constantly striving to find someone in that next stage of life where I'm striving to be. And that person can be even different ages. Like, I think back, and it's funny, and I think that we can mutually disciple each other. Like, I think back, Wes Akers is a good example. Wes does a great job of connecting dots. He's got the biblical knowledge, but also the real good life application. And so there's been times I've went to Wes and I said, "Hey, explain this to me. How is this working?" But then on the same token, I'm also looking at whether it be spiritually or even parenting, like, hey, look at that, mom or dad. For me, my oldest kid is 10. We go 10, 8, and 2. So I naturally want to be finding out, talking to parents who have those 14-year-old kids, that next stage. The same thing in marriage. I remember in college growing up, I loved being a part of the young married couples class because that was the next stage that I wanted to hit. And I wanted to learn from those people. And so for me, I think no matter what it is, there again, that can even be, it's funny because I feel like so many times we apply these principles everywhere else in our life. You know what? If I'm struggling financially, who do I need to go talk to? Somebody who's well off financially. It makes perfect sense. If I'm struggling with my weight, who do I need to go talk to? I need to talk to a physical trainer. The reality is everything else, I think we always we try to make discipleship this big complicated thing. And there again, I think it's Satan's perfect, just a distraction. Let me just distract and say, "Oh no, you're not near spiritual enough to disciple anybody. You couldn't possibly go do that." When the reality is, what people need to hear is how much you're not worthy. I mean, literally, I've probably taught people more in my failures than I've ever taught in what I said, because then they get to watch you.
That's right.
How are you going to respond when things aren't perfect?
I love that, man, because we are going to fail, and most people aren't willing to, I don't want to admit that, but then there's lessons to be learned in that. And I appreciate what you're saying about discipleship, because it always breaks my heart when people feel like they're not, I'm not doing discipleship. It's because we've made it this, and again, I'm not against one-on-ones where we're going to sit down with this preset, whoever's doing the disciple, and they come, that's fine. But that's just a part, that's an element, that's a part of this much bigger picture. And if I'm honest with you, I think about all the things I've learned from Greg. But did that come from a one-on-one setting with him sitting down saying, okay, what did it come from? If you go around the staff room and think, man, what have y'all learned from Greg? We're going to come up with a pretty good list of things. And why? Because we watched him live life in front of us.
Yeah.
And we paid attention. And so that's what I love about what you're saying, because discipleship is if we're being honest about what that word actually means, it's learning to obey. You think about the disciples with Jesus, like how much of their time, like obviously we got exactly what we need in the Bible, but that little verse at the end of John, Jesus did many other things, and if every one of them were written down, I suppose not even the whole world would be able to contain the books that would be written. It's like, whoa, that's kind of a mysterious verse. Like, how much of life did they just get to watch?
Yes.
They just watching him. I mean, yeah, of course we have record of what he said to them, but how much did they just watch?
Absolutely.
I'm guessing it was a whole lot. That's why that verse is in there. It's like, isn't that fun? And I love the simplicity of what you're challenging us to, because that actually encourages me to go be a part of it. Sometimes with discipleship, people get overwhelmed because they're like, I can't do that. And in fairness, like, I get it. We've made it this very complex thing that only a select few people who have all this secret knowledge can go do. Is like, it ain't that complicated. Like, let's just be around one another. Let's admit that there's success and failure, and let's go for it. And let's watch, let's observe, that's pretty simple, man. And it makes me want to be a part of it. Like, there's so much joy in it. That just feels so good and right. And I think there's balance to it, to your point. Like, we can't just hang out. I get it. Like, there has to be, there's times we bust out the Bible. There's times as you mentioned earlier, you have to come to me and say, hey, Justin, like, this is not right. Like, this is not right. And I'm going to say, oh man, hopefully I'm going to listen to you.
But just, that getting better daily. I mean, and that's what I think for me, like, I struggle with daily quiet times. And it's just like, but that doesn't mean, I think what Satan would have you do is he would be like, hey, dude, you struggle. Like, you're in no position to tell this person how to do it. And the reality is, well, you know what? Yeah, I'm not probably in a place that I'm going to tell somebody how to, this is how you successfully have a daily quiet time. I've got some tips and tricks that I probably could apply for myself. But what I can do is I can talk to them about, well, hey, how do you love your wife? How do you slow to anger with your kids? How do you, these sorts of things that are all still biblical principles that we're all still growing in a relationship with God. I mean, we're never going to arrive like where we can say, hey, do everything the way that I want to do. I guarantee you, there's people out there that have money. The way that they handle and manage money is something that I would love to follow after, but the way that they talk to their wife is something I have no interest in being a part of. And so I think also you can take snippets from different people in different sections and say, you know what, I definitely want to be a part of that. But you know what? This over here, I'd really like to try to, back off on a little bit.
Tell me this, because you said something earlier I thought was really good about being. When you were connecting with the young marrieds, you weren't married at that time, right? But yet you were learning, and so because so many times I feel like part of our flaw in learning from other people is we're kind of waiting to get in that season until we learn about it. Like, oh, let me wait till. But I thought that was really wise of you to go, I'm single. I want to be married. Why not hang out with, because you get that from singles a lot. It's like where they want to only hang out with singles. And I'm like, I think there's an opportunity to also learn. Why is it important to also not just wait till you're like in it, to learn from like a variety of things? Like, I thought that was really cool. Why would you do that? And what's the benefit of it?
Well, I think just as far as I always like to take things back to kind of common sense conversations, and here's the deal. I need to learn to swim before I fall out of the boat, because at that point it's too late. And I had a guy tell me one time, I thought it was very wise. He said, when you're married, you can't live like you're single. And what he meant was, hey, life's changing. There's no longer, you don't just get to go do what you want to do. Yeah. There's someone else involved.
To consider,
And then the same thing, once you have kids, you can't live like you don't. Because I've heard, I've heard that from folks a lot. And I mean, there's a lot of people who probably do a better job than I did as far as trying to remain in your normal life. But the most of the people that I've seen that are frustrated are the ones that are trying to live in a reality that they're not involved in. And that's like, I'm going to cruise around and pretend like I don't have kids. I'm still going to I want to drag the kids to every event that I ever wanted to go to. And it was like, the reality is, no, and you need to embrace those seasons too. I also think that people, men that I've talked to, I mean, time flies, and it's like, but for a season, you can handle this. Now, obviously, hopefully the time's not going to fly past on you being married. Yeah. But like as far as the seasons of having children, you know what? There are times you need to enjoy cartoons on a Saturday morning because it's not going to be long.
Amen.
Your kids are going to be too busy, and you're going to be jumping out of bed and being gone, and then past that, not too much longer, your kids are going to be gone on Saturday morning. Like they're going to be up and leaving. You're going to be like, man, what I'd give just to sit down and watch Tom and Jerry again with my kids or something.
I know, right?
So I guess that's what I'm saying is, for me, and I think you have to bite it off in small chunks. I'll never forget Tom Harmon, Lord, teach us to pray. He said one time, he said for him, he started off, he said, God, I want to try to have an hour of prayer at one point. And he said he had to start biting that off in small chunks. If I were to sit down, I'd go to Tom Harmon today and I'd say, hey, Tom, tomorrow morning, what time you want to meet? I want to meet and pray with you. Well, that dude, I think he's praying 3 or 4 hours now. And I'm just like, to be honest, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be like, dude, that is way over my head. There is no possible way. Like my mind's wandering after 5 minutes. But same thing, I guess I'm saying with that, the same application is I remember him saying, he's like, well, the first morning or first week, maybe he said he was going to get up and pray in bed. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to pray in bed this week. And he said, wasn't long. I remember I woke up and I was almost late for work. He said he fell asleep praying. So then he said he decided he was going to go stand in the doorway. And he said he found himself leaning against the wall, trying to fall asleep wondering. So then he started walking. And he said, now I can get up. He said, now it's a habit. Now I can sit in bed and pray because I know that that's what my mind's going to do. And so
that's cool.
I think with all of those things is when you find that person or people, there again, it's a wide array of folks. You find that person, you say, hey, I'd like to learn or watch this kind of stuff. And even then, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I need you to take time out of your day to do, like, hey, I want you to take me and teach me to fish. I'm going to say, hey, no, jump in the boat and let's go fishing.
Yep.
I don't want to sit at home in my shop and try to take time. I'm like, listen, we're all going to learn a whole lot better.
How many of the spiritual disciplines could we apply that to, right? It's like, let's not sit and talk about it. Let's actually just go do that thing and then learn as we go.
Well, and doctors, and I think this would be we can kind of wrap it up with this, but I always thought it was so cool because the way I understand it, in the industry, there is you watch one, do one, teach one. And whatever that is, you can apply that to life. And so for the start, watch how I do this. Watch me decide, watch that person, someone else is watching you. Okay. And then you turn around and they come and they say, hey, talk to me about what it's like, for a quiet time or how do you disciple kids that are struggling with this or that? Then you can say, hey, do one, and then turn around and then you start looking for someone else to start pouring into because then you have that challenge. I think you can have accountability kind of both ways. You have accountability up and somebody who's challenging you to get better, and then accountability down where you're challenging someone else, and then that keeps you right in the middle where you're always trying to keep it real.
That's good, man. I like it. And I like, you're right that you've hit a lot of good points, man, and just how that learning, if the goal is to pray the psalmist prayer, teach me, O Lord, because what hope do I have of teaching anybody anything if I myself am not learning, right? And the day I cease to be learning, I'm going to be a horrible disciple maker because I quit learning. We never graduate from that. So we got to keep learning, and those lessons are all over the place. Like they're in all the people in our lives. And I appreciate you saying it's in younger, it's in older, it's across the board. Man, I've had kids be like God has taught me lessons through whether they said something or I watched them do something. It could have been a crazy act of kindness, and I was like, wow, that was amazing. There's a lesson. Greg, as he walks through 1 Samuel, it's like, wow, there's lessons to be learned in the character of David, both good and bad, right?
Absolutely.
All of that. So I like the simplicity of the goal is for me to pay attention and to start learning, and then don't stop there. Find ways where I can then, and I'm passing it on some way, shape, or form, hopefully for the better.
Yes.
If I'm thinking about it, it's going to be a much better shot at it being for the better.
Yes.
If I forget that, I'm passing something on, might as well pass on something good.
Absolutely. So, people are watching, and a lot of this, just a reminder, is so much of this transfers through relationships. We live in a very try to be super connected world, and reality is a lot of it's unplugged, and a lot of the stuff that we see is not real. And just I just think there again, find real, authentic relationships, and that's where you're going to see the most change in you and also be the most change in other folks.
That's good. Brandon, thank you so much for being here today, my friend.
Been a blast.
All right, until next time, God bless.